Hi YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So we've got a thing that I've been asked a few times on can you do this or how to do it. Basically this is the battery board, if you like, from the handle of the NB4 Pro Plus transmitter, and on this it controls your two buttons on your actual handle. There's the two dials on the top of the transmitter. It's got the vibration motor. You've also got the DFU and reset button that's hidden under the handle, and it controls your charge circuit for the 18650. These are slightly different depending on whether you've got the NB4 Pro Plus or the original NB4, and it's just down to the cable that the throttle actually uses to connect. But let's bring you in for a close-up look and show you how to strip down a transmitter and how to get one of these fitted. So we've got our board and its transmitter itself. The first thing we're going to want to do is remove his base battery. So if you just pull back on the bottom of the transmitter, that'll get that off. Then we're going to be removing the rubber grip. So on this, if you just grab hold of it and just work your way around, should be able to pop all these out, and that'll get the grip off. Then we can take out the 18650. Now if you're using one of the original NB4 or the NB4 Pro, then to get this battery out you'll have to strip it down further. If you've got the NB4 Pro Plus or NB4 Plus, we can strip it down quite easily. So next thing we're going to have to do is remove this bracket at the bottom. So for this one we've got two little Phillips head screws, and you're just going to want to remove these. And it helps if you got one of the little magnetic trays, but most of these screws only fit in one place, so it does work out quite easy. So if you remember which way around you've got your transmitter stud and you put your brackets in that orientation, it'll make it easier for you putting them back on. Then in the base of the actual transmitter, if you look, we're going to be removing this side. So we've got one screw there and one screw there, and these are just Phillips head screws. So we can start by removing both those. And these are coarse thread Phillips head. The ones out of the little straps around the base, they're quite fine thread. And you just need to be a bit mindful when you're putting these back in. They're only small threads, so don't go crazy tight on them. They're both the same length, so we can move his wheel forward if it makes it easier for you. Then we got a bunch of screws, and these you're going to need a 1.5mm hex driver. So you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7. So we're just going to need to remove all these. So I'll get all these screwed out and then get back to you. So once we've got all 7 of these screws removed, next we're going to need to get these little dials off. Now whether you've got these little dials fitted or you've got the actual 3-position switches, all you've got to do is just carefully get some underneath them and pop them off. So because we're removing the board and these are on both sides, you will need to remove both sides of these little dials, and if you just carefully get some underneath them, you can pop them off without marking it or anything. So next we're just going to have to work our way around the transmitter, and you just want to carefully try and prise it open. And you do have this rubber strip at the front. You just want to make sure that's not popping out. But if you just carefully work your way around, probably easier if you've got fingernails, which I'm lacking in. And then if we move that back to the front, should now carefully be able to remove this. Now there's no wires or anything on this, so that shouldn't cause you too much of a problem. Next, we can see where all those connectors fasten in. These ones don't come out of the board. This, the ribbon cable for the throttle, which if it's on an original NB4, this cable I believe will be round the back of this board. So whereas this one is a ribbon cable, on the back of the other board you've got a socket with wires on the NB4 itself. So what we're going to have to do now is carefully pry all these little connectors up. So these two, the one for the throttle, if you just very carefully slide these little black connectors back, you should then be able to just carefully lift the ribbon cable. And that'll remove that. Then we have another connection at the top, and you've just got to carefully slide these up. Once you get the connection up, so we should start to see all those connectors come undone. Then this connector, should be able to carefully wiggle that, and that'll remove the connector to your thumb wheels. Then we've got as power, which we can disconnect. Now if you lift the little rubber bit out, then we can go to the bottom and remove our final Phillips head screw. Then we should be able to remove this part, and you've got one more socket on here. If we just disconnect that, one more socket on the back, and then we're almost ready to take this board out. We've just got 1, 2, 3, 4 screws, so we just need to remove those 4. I'll get that done. Right, so that is the 4 screws removed. What we should be able to do now is just lift the throttle mechanism away. Now if you're doing this on an NB4, this will be wires, not a ribbon cable, and it will go underneath this board. So once we've got that done, should now be able to carefully just wiggle the main screen, and it will lift away. So it'll just get that out your way, and then you can very carefully, remember we released this cable, so just very carefully clip that up. And this is also how you get to the ribbon cable that allows the wheel to turn side to side. So if you're replacing that, it's pretty much same process. So now we've got 3 plastic lugs that locate this board. Just be very careful not to break any of your ribbon cables. And basically we've just got to get under here and very carefully pry this board up, and we're just trying to get it off the actual lugs. And you can see just very slight pressure and it will start to lift. And then finally we've got the one at the bottom. And then lastly you've got this little connector on the back that we need to pop out, and that's for your speaker. So once we remove this, now if you'd got a faulty component on here and you know what you're doing and you're quite good with a soldering iron, you can then swap these out. So you've got the vibration motor, you've got the switches. So there's 4 little switches. So if you'd got one of these go faulty, technically you can unsolder one and swap it if you're not using the others, but the boards are relatively cheap from Soarsky. So once we take out the faulty board, we've then got as replacement, and while the board's out, it's a good time to release these little clips, and then they're ready to accept your ribbon cables. So first thing, we're going to want the tiny little sound cable attached. And for this, it'll be hard to see on the camera, but you've got 2 little lugs that face out and you've got 1 little spike that faces in. So once you get that into position, then just make sure the cable's routed behind these 2 lugs, because we don't want that catching on anything. Then we get that into position. So slowly start to drop it down into place. Then you've got the 3 big plastic lugs, and if you just gently push down on the board, it'll clip onto them. Then we can get our steering ribbon, and again, don't force this, they are very delicate. Then all you need to do is push the tabs back till they're flat. Make sure this is sat pretty flush on the top. Then we've got our ribbon connection, we've got our wire connection for as thumb wheels, we've got as main power. Then moving down towards the bottom, we've got these 2 cables. So first off, you want the red one. And if you get that into position with the sort of comb facing outwards, and you've got to make sure that that's going to sit down into that place. Then we've got 2 little lugs on the back of this cable, and they go into the bottom. Now this one is going to be a little bit awkward because there's not a lot of room on the Pro and the NB4 Plus to get these in. So basically we have to get that sat in, but then we've got to get this all wire assembly to run down the back of the battery compartment, which is a little easier said than done. So it kind of sits underneath that circuit board and then moves around the side. So I'll try my best to get it on camera, but you want to take the cable down underneath here and then round, and you just want to make sure that none of these wires are going to get pinched. But once you've got that into place, you've then got this sort of rubber housing, if you like, and we've got this lip, and this sits inside that lip. Just make sure that these wires aren't going to stick over it, because the other side of the case comes down pretty close on here. Then with these open, we can then get as throttle mechanism, and you can drop that into place. Make sure you get your adjustment screw head in the right position, and then this can be quite tricky because we've basically got to get this into that. But once it's in position, just make sure it's pushed all the way in, and then we just need to close this connector. Now if you just slowly work it side to side, you can get it in. And then we just need to make sure this ribbon cable's sat flat and not getting pinched anywhere. So once we've got that in place, we've then got a screen. Now it's a good time to make sure that any of these cables and these pads are in position. Make sure the internal cable is seated, and then we're just going to sort of sit this into position and just slightly push it down. Then you've got this big connector. Make sure that's sat all the way on. Once we've got that in, we've then got 1, 2, 3 and 4 screws to fit. So we just need to get these 4 screwed back in. Don't over tighten these. You're not trying to crush the circuit board, and you don't want to be stripping threads. And just remember, don't push down too hard on the transmitter, because you will push this screen off. And really, this seems like a much bigger job than it is. The only time you're going to cause yourself problems is if you try and be far too heavy-handed with these tiny little ribbon cables, or if you try and pull it apart. The next thing, we need our screw in the bottom of here. So furthest away from the open side. And I just find it easy to work on these and do things in a certain order. They do seem to come apart and go together really well. Then make sure this screen is pushed down all the way onto the actual transmitter body. So we've got all as 4 screws back in. We've got as cables connected. We've got as ribbon cable for as throttle, as ribbon cable for a screen, as ribbon cable for the steering, and the speaker plugged in on the rear. So once we've got all them in position, we can then line his actual transmitter case back up, and these go on a lot easier than they came off. So once you've got that, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they all need putting back in, and these are the 1.5mm hex head. Just make sure you've got your rubber gone into position properly on the front of the transmitter. And again, with these screws, you really don't want to be over tightening them. They are quite coarse thread because they're going into plastic, but ultimately you don't want to over tighten them. We're not trying to crush the transmitter back together. There is 7 of these things in, and they do hold in pretty good. So it's not something that you really need to over tighten. These little magnetic trays do make life a whole lot easier when you're working on stuff like this. And big shout out to the guys at Soarsky that supply a lot of these spares. So once we've got them in, you've then got the screws in the base of the transmitter. So we've got 1 in that side, and then you got 1 towards the front of the handle. And for anybody that doesn't know, the gap in the bottom of this is where you put the expansion module for the RM005 Mini Z adapter. Then we'll want to get our brace for the bottom, and this is going to be the Phillips head screws with the really fine thread. And I must admit, this does seem a far more daunting job than it is, and it can fix a whole number of issues that you can get yourself into with these radios, especially if you bash them around or get them wet or break them somehow. So once we've got all these in, next we want to refit his battery. Then we want to refit his battery cover. We've got as little dials or as 3 position switches, and these will only go on one way, so if you put them on and you just spin them round, eventually they do line up and drop on. You can get yourself some idea with the little lugs in the bottom so you can get them close, but they just push on pretty easy. And then to fit the handle, if you start from bottom and just get the 2 clips in, it's quite easy to just work round, get them into place. And then the top, you can just bend it back and it clips on. Then we need to clip on our base battery. So just clip it down, push forward. So now we got it back together. Let's make sure all his buttons work. I've got these all assigned, so
timer start,
as trigger, first timer,
timer reset,
timer reset,
center point,
1 variable
center
dial,
point, center point,
as other
center
variable
point.
dial, 1 of our thumb controls, and the other thumb control, as throttle, as steering, all
Center
those little
point.
trim buttons are working,
Center point.
and as speakers obviously working. So yeah, it's a good way of fixing any of the issues that you get from this board. So if you do manage to blow your charge circuit or your vibration motor stops working, any of the trigger buttons, any of these potentiometers, if you somehow manage to damage them, the main reset and DFU buttons on the back. But yeah, quite nice that we can get hold of these spares, and it's not too much of a task to swap all these out. So let's wrap this one up. So there you have it, the main control charge board swapped out on the NB4 Pro Plus, but this is the same procedure for the NB4 Plus, NB4, NB4 Pro. The only caveat will be the actual throttle connection. On the Pro Plus, it's a more sensitive throttle, so it has a ribbon cable, and on the rest of them, I believe they're still using the wire connection that comes from the back to the back of that board instead of from the front. But pretty much same procedure. But thanks again for watching Wtf Rc Cars. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share to friends and family, and catch you guys again in the next one.